Well, good morning. Thanks for being here. I'm here to introduce Breanna Matzen. She is a music education major, and she's going to be doing her student teaching in the fall. So she is on schedule to graduate in December 2026. It's been a distinct pleasure to work with Breanna for the past 2 semesters. And her project title is The Fibonacci Sequence in Music, the Golden Ratio and its use in Western tonal modern a cappella works. Please join me in welcoming Breanna Matzen.
Thank you for the introduction. As Dr. Hawkinson mentioned, my project is on the Fibonacci sequence in music, the Golden Ratio, and its use in Western tonal modern a cappella works. So, to start off today, what even is the Golden Ratio in the Fibonacci sequence? So the Golden Ratio can be described as an unequal division of a line into 2 parts as seen in the picture below. The ratio of the whole to the longer part is equal to the ratio of the longer part to the shorter part. So the mathematical proportion is approximately equal to 1.168033, which will be important later. And then the actual Fibonacci sequence numbers are listed on the screen here. So to get this sequence, what you do is you take the previous 2 numbers and add them together to get the next number in the sequence. So 0 plus 1 equals 1, 1 plus 1 equals 2, 2 plus 1 equals 3, 3 plus 2 equals 5, and etc. from there. And basically it just keeps on going on for infinity. And this sequence and the Golden Ratio can be found in nature and is typically used for aesthetic purposes, especially it can be seen in a lot of art forms as well as in nature. So, to give a little bit more on the mathematical background, so the first person to ever introduce the term golden section, his name was Martin Ohm. He was a German mathematician. He wasn't the first to discover it or implement it, however, just the first person to put a name to it. And he actually called it the Goldener Schnitt, which would be German for the golden section. The Greek mathematician Euclid of Alexandria, he's from 300 BC, he's actually the first to describe the Golden Ratio and to use it. He didn't put a name to it yet, but he's the first documented person to kind of describe the mathematical phenomenon. But even way before him, we have seen this used in the Egyptians for them building their pyramids. There has been a large prominence of the Golden Ratio and Fibonacci sequence in the Renaissance era. This is kind of when we started seeing it boom in a lot of artwork forms. Several artists implemented it. And one that you guys are probably familiar with is Leonardo da Vinci. He obviously painted the Mona Lisa up there, and you can kind of see that spiral, which is associated with the Golden Ratio. And there's research that proves that he intentionally did this in a lot of his paintings during that era. So what are some examples of the Golden Ratio that occur in nature? There's leaves and the petals on flowers, so the spirals on there. The heads of sunflower seeds, which you can see in the top left, you can kind of see how those seeds form that perfect Golden Ratio spiral. The pine cones, so the part that goes around the pine cones on the outside. One that is commonly known in science classes and is typically referred to is seashells, because you can kind of almost perfectly see the spiral happening there. Also, it happens a lot in human anatomy, especially in our bone structure. So one way we can see this is in the phalanges of the human hand. You can even look at your own hand. So going back to about 2 slideshows ago, seeing that line segment at the bottom of the screen, your hand phalanges are actually equal to that Golden Ratio sectioning as well. And then more recently, they've actually been trying to implement the Golden Ratio into cancer research as well. So we've talked about ways that we've seen it in nature, in science, all those sorts of things. But what are ways in which the Golden Ratio can be implemented into music? So one of the main ways that we can see the Golden Ratio implemented into music is especially through the climax of pieces occurring 0.618 of the way through a piece. So this can especially be seen if you've ever gone to a musical theater show. If you think about Act 1 versus Act 2, Act 1 is typically slightly longer than Act 2, and for some reason this just really resonates with humans, and they typically enjoy the show a lot more if the first section is just slightly longer than that second section. Another way that we can see it in music is through melodic construction. This can be through chords and through different intervals. You can see it in the timing of a piece, so maybe something is happening at certain measure numbers that adhere to numbers of the Fibonacci sequence. You can see it in rhythmic ratios, so possibly an important word happening on beat 1 or 3, which adheres to the sequence, or you can see it in rests as well. Another way is the 13-note chromatic scale. So 13 is a number of the sequence as well, and along with those half steps that occur in there. You can see it in time signatures. For example, if a composer uses like 3/8 time or 5/8 time, that'd be 3 beats in a measure or 5 beats in a measure, which those numbers also adhere to the sequence. You can see it in key changes. So maybe a key change happens at the climactic point in the piece, or maybe a key change goes from like a 1 to a 5, and those numbers would also be included in the sequence. You can see it in tempo changes. Typically these tempo changes are going to outline parts of the piece that adhere to the Fibonacci sequence through like measure numbers, things such as that. And you can also see it in special chords. For example, if a composer happens to throw an uncommon chord in there, like a Neapolitan chord per se, at maybe a part in the piece that adheres to numbers of the sequence as well. So there are several composers through all the eras that have used the Fibonacci sequence and golden ratio in their pieces. The most famous one is probably Bela Bartok. He was an ethnomusicologist who implemented the golden ratio into some of his works. His most well-known Fibonacci work, and probably the most studied work that we know intentionally used the Fibonacci sequence in it, is the first movement of First Strings Percussion and Celesta. Mozart was a classical composer who also used the golden ratio in a lot of his piano sonatas, one of the most famous ones being Sonata No. 1 in C major. Dufay was a composer and theorist during the early Renaissance, kind of like Leonardo da Vinci, except he was on the composing side. And he actually wrote 3 motets that adhere to the golden ratio, and you can see the names of them listed on the screen. And then Eliotti was a choral composer of the late Renaissance and early Baroque era, and she implemented the golden ratio in her piece, Oche la vaga aurora. And what's kind of special about her is not a lot of women got their pieces published back then. There was a lot of women composers, but it was very rare for them to get their pieces published. And the fact that not only she got her piece published, but also that it implemented some of these kind of mathematical and scientific phenomenons is pretty significant. So diving further into examples of how these artists specifically used the golden ratio in their pieces. So for Bartok, his piece is 88 measures long, and all of these numbers that I'm about to talk to adhere to the Fibonacci sequence. So the first movement of his piece is 55 measures long, and then the final measures of his piece are 21 measures long, and then within those 21 measures, they're actually divided into 13 and 8. So all of those numbers adhere to the sequence. He has measure numbers where the climax occurs. He uses several different time signatures where all of the number of beats per measure typically occur to the sequence. We can also see this in his phrasing and interval usage of numbers also adhering to that sequence. So looking at Mozart's sonata, his exposition of his piece is 38 measures long, and then the development and recapitulation section is 62 measures long, both numbers adhering to the sequence. Dufay's motets, so the climax occurs at the golden ratio. This is something that we're going to commonly see through all of these pieces. But his piece is also calculated into semibreves, and the numbers that he calculates these into adhere to the Fibonacci sequence. And also within his piece, there's cadential moments at measures that also adhere to the sequence, so they kind of make those numbers feel a little bit stronger throughout his piece. And then for Eliotti, in her piece, the climax occurs at the golden ratio, as we're commonly seeing, but also within her piece, so she has the first section and then the second section. Within the first section, there's also a golden ratio moment within the first section, and also one within the second section. So not only for the overarching song, but also within many sections of her song as well. So how am I actually going to implement all of this research? So what I decided to do, since I realized that there was typically more instrumental research done on pieces that have implemented the golden ratio and Fibonacci sequence, I wanted to be able to contribute to maybe having some research on the choral side of things, specifically in the a cappella world. So I decided to compose a piece called First Crocus that we will be listening to later. And basically my goal was to compose a work that implemented the golden ratio in multiple different aspects that I've seen some of the previous composers do, but do it more in a choral setting. So first I had to pick out a poem. So this poem is written by Professor Lisa, and basically she participated in a competition where they had to write a couple different poems. I believe it was 3 different poems that all adhered some way to the golden ratio or Fibonacci sequence. So the way that she wrote this poem is that the syllable count per line follows the decimal expansion of the Fibonacci sequence. So you'll see the first line is 1, 6, 1, 8, 0, 3, 3, 9. And I did show that decimal earlier in the slides, but you'll see it one more time later. And then the poem reads, first crocus stirs a longing, for soft breezes and birds' wistful calls. Then there's a blank moment of silence. Grasses bow, scented green, memories of snow cradle her bloom. So, as I said, there's the decimal expansion on there. You can see it adheres to that poem as well. And the poem only follows the decimal expansion to about 7 decimal places. And within this competition, they refer to these type of poems as a Goldie. So going more into my composition, in order to create this composition, I first had to familiarize myself with the golden ratio and how past composers have implemented it. That's why I showed that research here at the beginning of the slides. And then I had to decide on ways that I wanted to implement these numbers throughout my piece in a variety of musical elements through the analyzation of past composers. So this is my piece that I decided to compose. I do have it later on in my slideshows as well, but I wanted to give you guys a little bit of a glance before I kind of go into the analyzation of it. So since it is the most commonly seen form of implementing the golden ratio into different types of compositions, I decided that the first thing I wanted to do was make sure the climax of my piece occurred 0.618 of the way through my composition. So not only does the climax occur there, but to kind of outline that this is the climax happening, I have crescendos leading up to this climax and a forte dynamic at this climax, so it kind of more outlines that this is kind of an arrival point in the piece. And then also the chord that happens in that measure is a tonic root position chord, and it happens in measure 13 out of 21 of the piece, which is that ratio. Another way that I wanted to implement it was through syllables and phrasing, so definitely choosing a poem that already adhered to the golden ratio helped me in that, in the Fibonacci sequence. So the syllable count of each line of the poem follows that decimal expansion, like I previously explained. But not only do the syllables adhere to the Fibonacci sequence, but so does the number of letters in each syllable of measures 1 through 7. So kind of another layer to that. And then important words or syllables also typically occur on beat 1 of my piece. It's in a 3/4 time signature. So beat 1 is a strong beat, but also the number 1 adheres to the sequence. Another way that I decided to implement it was through repetition. So important words that I found important in the piece are repeated 3 times, which is a number of the sequence. And measure numbers where this word repetition occurs also adheres to the sequence. So the measure number where it occurs, the number up there, should also be a part of the sequence. The duration of beats and their occurrences. So the word memories is not only repeated 3 times, but it's also set to a rhythm of 8th note triplets. So the 8th note is there in the middle, and what a triplet means is that there's 3 of those 8th notes together, all evenly divided over a beat with a 3 over them, so that 3 adheres to the sequence. There's also 8th rests in all voices occurring on beat 8 and 21 of the piece, and a quarter rest occurs in almost every voice on beat 3 after the climax of the piece. There's also several changes in texture throughout my piece. The first 3 bars is kind of an introduction. Then the next 5 bars leads to a perfect authentic cadence in measure 8. And then the next phrase is 5 measures long, all of these being numbers of the sequence. Tonic chord placement. So My piece is in F major, which would be the tonic. So root position tonic chords occur in measures 1, 3, 8, 13, and 21. So what that means is that these measure numbers that adhere to the sequence are going to feel stronger because they have the tonic chord placed within them. They provide harmonic and tonal stability. So also there is a root position tonic chord on beat 55 of the work that articulates the final two phrases of the text. For dynamics, we kind of discussed this previously, but the forte dynamic happens at the climax of the piece, and there is that crescendo leading up to it. And there's also a variation of dynamics on repeated words throughout my piece. So if a word is repeated like 3 times per se, I try to use dynamics to kind of outline that, to give it a little bit of contrast to make those words pop as well. And then last but not least, also the measures per system adhere to the Fibonacci sequence. So for the first 3 systems, they each have 5 measures, and that is also a number of the sequence. So looking back to my piece one more time, I'll kind of actually point out things now that we've actually got the chance to discuss it. So a system is kind of, this entire block is what we call a system. So you'll notice 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 measures long there. And then in terms of words repeating, you'll see that the word stirs repeats 3 times, and each time the dynamic increases on that. There's the memories that I talked about, those triplets that occur in there that we discussed. The climax of the piece is up at the top there. You'll see that crescendo leading up into there, and then the forte dynamic that kind of happens at that arrival point as well. And then I won't go into the analysis of it, but then you can kind of see where some potential perfect authentic cadence chords are appearing in the piece as well. So now that we've talked about the analyzation of the piece, I actually had the opportunity to sing this with some members of my a cappella group, Aude Voces, at me and my friend Tyler Bowie's senior recital. So I wanted to take this time to kind of play that video for you guys. It will be over my computer audio, so hopefully it is loud enough, but there's only 3 people in here, so hopefully it'll be okay. That's what the piece sounds like after looking through all those analyzations. And then for the last part of my slideshow, I just wanted to make sure that I presented my bibliography that I used to create both my research paper and to provide me some information to include in this slideshow. And then I also cited the images that you guys saw throughout this slideshow. And then I just wanted to take these last couple of minutes to see if you guys had any questions, maybe about the slides that I presented or about the personal composition, any sort of things like that.